Hey everybody, welcome back, huh? Alrighty, Vegas Dice Kings. So, we got Ralph back with us tonight. Last week I had my daughter Lindsay here. We had a lot of fun. If you didn't see it, go back, check out the show. I wanted to let you know we're going to change format a little bit. We kind of had open discussion. We're going to each have our own little spot in the show from now on to talk about, we all have something a little bit different. Ralph has a lot of great stuff. So what I'm talking about is I'm going to show you my email and my phone number. What I'm looking for personally is these personal stories from you dealers, pit bosses, a story like, the shift boss shit his pants, whatever, you know what I mean? Or somebody got arrested in the pit, that kind of stuff. Send those to me. You got these beautiful Vegas stories. Ralph and Patton, who was on the show, they're going to be handling that. So now Ralph and I are both brand new to the show. Danny's been here for a while. And our goal is, though, to keep the show in the same direction we were going, which is the show started as a conversation between some crap dealers, all right? When I first looked at it a couple of times, it was like, why do you keep talking about you living in the memories or whatever? Like, hey, I was a high school quarterback, and you're 50 years old. It's not about that. It's about, you need to understand, being a crap dealer back then was that different, okay? 21 dealers, roulette, baccarat, that's different. Back in the day, what we're talking about, crap dealing, was different, okay? It was a whole separate world. We're going to keep the show going, talking about stuff like that, plus these other things. For example, on the news this week, we've seen they're finding bodies out at Lake Mead. Now, the Crazy Horse burned down the other day. So the one-time owner, Rick Rizzolo, what a great guy, great player, King Kong George. Rick was great. It was nice to see him in the news again. Hopefully he's not in trouble for nothing. We'll see what happens. Last week I had my daughter on here, Lindsay. She was here. We had a bunch of fun. So from now on, it's going to be the three amigos here. We're going to take it into the next era. But I wanted to say something. So I've been watching some of the previous shows. So the show started with a guy, Jimmy Cheese, right? And Patton. I never met Jimmy. I got to do a couple shows with Patton. I was honored, and they have great conversations. And that's why I am stressing the fact that we're going to keep saying with those kind of stories and stuff like that. These stories, everybody who knows them and witnessed them, we're getting older now, all right? They are, to me and a lot of people, as important as the implosions are, all right? I'm going to tell you, so I'm going to give you an idea how different craps is, being a crap dealer back then, all right? So, to be a crap dealer back then, you had to be a crap dealer, you had to be a mathematician, and you had to be a psychologist, okay? Let me tell you something, all right? When I talk about the mathematician, all right? So let's say a crap dealer goes out, parties one night, you get a hangover, you come into work, you're hungover, this and that, and you can literally walk up to a crap table where you're going to tap this guy on the shoulder, he's going to turn around and leave. Whatever's out there is yours, all right? The next roll of the dice, you better be ready, all right? I call this the Manhattan effect because, all right, so that you've seen crap tables, right? Those little boxes are about this big. You have 8 players. So what you got to do is you got to fit 4 chips wide on the top, 4 chips wide on the bottom. But players even actually make more bets than that. I'm going to give you a scenario when I learned about this the hard way, okay? So, I came in on the stick, all right? This layout is covered with bets. The stick man is responsible mostly for the ones right there in the middle. Call them proposition bets, all right? So you get this hangover. Last thing you want to do is come to work. You walk in, before the dice even roll, you're looking down. You have $125 for an I-12. You got $150 on the 9 hopping. You got a $50 high and low. You got a $200 straight up horn. You got hard ways working. Some hard ways are off. This is all in 2-3 seconds. Boom. You give them the dice roll. If it rolls 12, 11 or something, you better become the mathematician real quick. You have these phenomenal numbers. If you come in, your whole crew comes on to a busy game. Now, even if you're not on the stick and you're one of the base guys on the side of the table, you look down there. There's room for 8 bets. You have 8 players making place bets, which is 4 bets. Then you have players some are playing the come bets on top of that. And then they're all taking different odds, all right? I know this sounds confusing, but this is just a scenario of what it's like back then to be a crap dealer. You have to know every answer. If you got a big player, I've heard stories, players quit coming to hotels because the dealer screwed up on the game, all right? You're talking about this hotel with a client who spends millions and millions of dollars. He's gone because you screwed up on the crap table. That was kind of like the pressure that was on us, but that's what we took because the reward was so much better. Like I said, some of the earlier shows before I got here, Muff got here, you guys talk a lot about that, Dan. That was pretty informative. So I just wanted to talk about that. And then one last thing, you heard me say it before, all right? Back then, when you went to work, I was always excited to go to work. It wasn't like you were going to have a great night. When you went to work every night, there was a possibility it was going to be a life-changing moment, okay? And it has happened. It's happened to all of us. So basically, I wanted to give you that little scenario, let you know what we're talking about. We're not a bunch of lumpy 21 dealers. You're talking about some very experienced crap dealers, and we're proud of that. To be a good crap dealer, 5 years. You got to deal 5 years, and you will still see something new every night. So I just wanted to give a shout out for us crap dealers and stuff like that. And that's about it. I'm going to turn it over to Ralph. All right?
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things I wanted to do before I got into the new stuff, last couple of times I talked, I missed a couple of things that I should have included in some of the stories I was telling, and he threw me off now. I've got a producer who's a great guy. Anyway, so I just wanted to make up some of the things that I missed. One of the things was I said buffets when I put up that one picture of Marketown, and I said they had a free buffet. Well, it wasn't a buffet. There was no such thing as buffets in 1958, 59, and 60. It was a chuck wagon. And that's what it said. It was a chuck wagon. When I put up some other things, I said they were buffets, and they really were. Like, I put up a list of buffets, but it was a list of chuck wagons all over town, in which the Silver Slipper had a 98-cent 24-hour. But they were called chuck wagons, and you never heard buffet in those days. Right. Everything was a chuck wagon. And the point I'm trying to make about that is Las Vegas in the late 50s and 60s was very Western. there was cowboys walking around, guys with guns hanging out. You could see a 6-gun on their head strapped to their waist. A lot of cowboys, cowboy hats, Westerners, riding horseback up and down the strip behind the hotels. They had a couple of horse stables where you could rent horses only a block or two off the strip. Right behind one of the hotels. I know there was one behind El Rancho, just about 2 blocks off the strip west, and there was another one further up that you could rent a horse and ride all over the place. So it was very Western in those days, particularly downtown, but even on the strip. And they also had El Dorado, which I think was once a year, where it was like a big parade up Main Street. All Western cowboys with floats and everything from all the hotels had a float, and it was all full of horseback riders and cowboys, and even the sheriff, Ralph Lamb, would ride a horse with his brothers. They were all cowboys. So that's the point I'm trying to make. There was no such thing as a buffet. Nobody ever heard the word buffet until quite a few years later. They were all chuck wagons. So, and I messed up when I said buffets. The other thing I didn't mention that I should have when I was trying to bring you up to date on how things were in those days, the casino chips were just like cash in your pocket. If you took a $25 chip or a $5 chip and you went to the drugstore, you could pay them with a $25 chip or a $5 chip. And they took it without any question. You went all over. You went to the movies. You could pay your movie ticket with a $25 chip. You could. John just said you could make a donation in church, throw a $5 chip and a $25 chip if you were a sport in the basket. So the chips were just like cash. And of course, there's slot machines everywhere in Vegas. I couldn't believe that when I first got there. I go to a drugstore and there were slot machines, and I went to a food market and there were slot machines. But the point I'm trying to make is there were chips were just like having cash in your pocket. And that went on for a long time. And then they finally stopped it because it was a lot of trouble to have to go pick them all up. They had to send runners out to go pick up the chips at different banks and everything and bring them back to the hotel. And when people were stealing, it was hard. It was easy for them to get rid of what they were stealing. They just spent it. Now they had to cash it out at the cage, and it made it a little more difficult. So that's another reason why they stopped it. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that a lot of people don't realize that in the old days, casino chips were just like cash. And a lot of trouble went on with sometimes when a casino would close, they'd cancel the chips. And people like us, we would buy those canceled chips for a couple of bucks a stack. It was 20 in a stack, and practice with them. They were actual casino chips, which were hard to find and expensive to buy. And that's what you would take home and practice with on your table so you could be a good dealer. But people use those for, well, I wasn't going to tell this, but I'll tell a quick story about it. Later on, I was living in the Landmark Apartments. This was in the early 60s. And it was all dealers and showgirls living in the Landmark Apartments. They had a great big pool. Everybody would be around the pool every day. And it was a lot of fun living there. Well, there was a group of guys that were baccarat dealers from the Sands who had apartments there in the Landmark Apartments. And they had a bunch of the $25 chips from the Sans Souci. It had just closed. I bought some $5 chips to practice with. I didn't care about what denomination there was. I was just going to practice with them. But they bought the $25 chips for a reason, and I didn't know what it was, but that's what they were after. Well, then a little while, we were all by the pool, and a couple of these working girls from California used to come in on weekends. I don't know what they did. Maybe they were starlets trying to make a go of it in Los Angeles, and they were struggling, so they would come on weekends, and they would work at night, and I know you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, two of them come walking by the swimming pool. We were all out there, and the group of guys from the Baccarat Sands knew them, and they called them over. Hey, come on over, So they had a few drinks, and they took these girls up to their apartments, and they disappeared for the rest of the day. And that night, the girls were trying to cash out all the $25 chips they had and it happened they went to the Sands to do it, which is where these guys worked. And they had paid them off with these plug $25 chips, which were worth zero, and they had hundreds of dollars worth of them. And they tried to cash them out of the cage, and when they wouldn't cash them out, they made a big commotion, screaming and hollering. The poor girls got arrested, and that's the story that happened with the canceled $25 chips. And some people say it was very funny, and some people say it was awful, terrible, cruel. But you pick whichever way you feel about it. But that's what would happen.
They got chipwrecked in Vegas.
They got chipwrecked. Anyway, I just wanted to mention the fact that the chips were just like cash in those days, and you could spend them anywhere in town on anything, even the doctor's office. One of the other things that I missed when I talked about the trouble I had in my first job at the Mint, and I got arrested for punishing one of the guys that gave me a hard time, and I was leaving the Mint with my few dollars to go get something to eat, and his assistant came running towards me to help me, and I asked him why, and I forgot to give you the answer, and it's an important answer. He said, "It took you 3 days to do something I've been wanting to do for 7 years and didn't have the guts to do." He said, "So that's why I want to help you. I really admired what you did." And he's the guy who took me across the street to Nevada Club and got me the job there. And I forgot to mention that, and I think it was kind of a big part of that story, the reason why he came running to help me, because I did something he'd been wanting to do for 7 years and never got around to it. Another thing about when I first went to work at the Nevada Club, I didn't have a place to live. And there were some guys that were break-ins and some shills that were just starting to break in. There was 4 of them living in a studio apartment. And they said, "Why don't you come and share the studio apartment with us?" And I said, "How the hell is 5 guys going to share a studio apartment?" And they said, "Well, we all work different shifts, some graveyard, some days, so it's not that tough. There's a single bed and there's a couch, and we'll work it out." So I jumped right in because I didn't have anywhere to live. And so that's where I lived for quite a few months with those other 4 guys in this studio apartment, a little studio apartment. And the only thing we ever had in the refrigerator was bologna, white bread, and mustard. That's the only thing that I ever saw in the refrigerator anytime I ever opened it for 3 months. That's all anybody ever put in there. But that's where I lived. Another thing that I wanted to mention, when I was starving and I would be short, I'd only have 25, 30 cents in my pocket. There was a machine at the Mint that I discovered when I was working there that paid off, and it was a nickel machine. It paid off a lot of $2.50 jackpots, and more so than any of the other machines. And the number I remember was 327. I still remember that was 60 years ago. And so when I was desperate, I only had 25, 30 cents. I would go take a shot in that machine just to get enough money to get something to eat. And at least half the time I would hit one of those $2.50 jackpots, and it would feed me for a couple of days in those days. So I'll never forget slot number 327.
And that's no baloney.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You see what I mean about this guy? He always has something good to say. One other thing, when I was at the Nevada Club, you talk about different people coming in. You never know who you're facing and everything. One time we came in, a mailman came in to go shoot craps, and he was in his uniform. He had his mail bag on his back, and he came up and he was drunk. And he came up to the table and he threw in a pack of $100 bills, and he played craps and lost it. And then he walked away. "I'm going to the men's room," and he left. And then he came back with another pack of $100 bills and lost that. Another trip to the men's room, and now he came back with 50s and 20s. Well, he kept making these trips. Meantime, he's drinking while he's losing and getting drunker. And finally, he stopped going to the men's room, and he was just digging into the bag and pulling out. He was down to ones. And he lost all that, and then he stumbled and left. And of course, we all figured that he found a package in the mail that was full of cash, and he decided to take a shot with it and end up losing it all. But at first he was keeping a secret that it was in his pouch, but by the time he was so drunk, he said, "I'm not going upstairs to do it," and he just was pulling it out. But he lost all this. Little mailman lost, I don't know how many thousands of dollars in cash money out of his mail pouch.
Didn't deliver the mail that day.
That's something I always remember.
Wow.
This poor mailman. The other thing about the Nevada Club, one of the guys I befriended, he was about my age. We were probably the two youngest guys that worked there. I was barely 21 when I first started, and he was the same age. His name was Lee Greenwood. He played a guitar in the lounge. The lounge was maybe 5 or 6 tables. They had entertainment there, you know, a group. Vito Musso was a famous saxophone player. He had a show there. But when there wasn't a big show, they had a fill-in, and it was a guy who sang and played the guitar that nobody paid any attention to. But I befriended him because he was my age. He was a young guy like me, and so we would sit and have coffee together. And it was Lee Greenwood, the guy who wrote the song, I'm Proud to Be an American. I think that's where he started his career in the Nevada Club.
Wow.
There. Another thing, when we talk about the Horseshoe in those days, it was a 25-cent crap game. The Boulder Club had a 10-cent crap game, and when I was breaking in, one of the things they told us that I forgot to mention to you is, if you really want to learn how to deal craps, go and play craps, go and gamble, and watch and put the money in and make different bets and see how it's handled. That'll teach you a lot about how to deal the game by watching these deals. Go on the strip and watch the guys on the strip, and just stand by the table if you don't want to gamble, and just stand by a game that's got a lot of action and watch how they deal it, and that'll help you a lot. But it's even better if you play, you know, just play quarters at the Horseshoe in a quarter game. So I used to go to the Horseshoe a lot. And one of the things I had noticed, and I couldn't understand, is always guys with pad and a pencil there. And so I asked, I finally said, you know, this is curious. I never see, you know, anywhere else, but the Horseshoe's always got a guy with pad and pencil guys. And they said that's guys that are trying out their systems before they get into serious money to see how it works. They do it with quarters first. And one of the famous guys that was there, he was on TV a lot, and they even had him in a movie, a guy, it was called System Smitty. I don't know what his real name was, but they called him System Smitty. He always had a different system, and he would hustle big money people to back him up, and most of the time he blew their money because systems don't work. But that's what these pencil and paper guys were about, and I couldn't understand it at the beginning, but they were all guys trying out a system with 25-cent play initially, and then they would go from there. That's what broke me, a system. I lost my damn Cadillac on a system. Okay. Dealers on a break downtown, I don't know if they could do this later, but downtown we were connected on one side to the California Club, the Nevada Club, the California Club. Then there was a Lucky Strike and a Golden Nugget on the other corner. Dealers on a 20-minute break, they would come from the Golden Nugget and from the California Club and shoot craps or play 21 on their breaks, you know, just come and get in action and then go back to work and work another hour and then come back and play 20 minutes. So most of the guys, if they would come to my spot or one of the break-ins and see that I was just starting, because you could see I was a little confused and I was nervous and I was trying so hard, and they would understand that and they go along with it because they were in that spot. But every now and then you'd get one that would throw the chips at you and make his bets fast and holler at you because you didn't know what you're doing and give you trouble. And so I had one of those, and I met him in the alley in the back, and we had quite a conversation back there. But he was from the California Club. But the point I'm trying to make is they did gamble a lot on their breaks, 20 minutes. They'd move around, and there was no objection to that. They weren't allowed to gamble in their own casino, but they could gamble in anybody else's. I guess that pretty much covers that. One last thing. I was talking about silver dollars when I went to work at the Sahara, how difficult it was for me. And John stepped in and he mentioned silver dollars when he was learning. And what he did that struck me is he went like this with both hands. And that registered something with me that I wanted to mention to you. in those days, particularly because they were boxmen, now it's not important because there's no boxman. But let's say this is a crap table, and he's a dealer, and he's a dealer, and I would be the boxman, and all the chips would be in front of me. And any big chips that had to be dealt, I would hand them to the dealers from here. The dealers don't reach in the rack and grab them. The black chips, I would put them out for the dealer when he needed them. But when you were a dealer, you had to learn, if you were the dealer on this side, if you were going to cut any checks out to make change, like the boxman might say, okay, this guy just threw in $500, give him 500 in greens. It would be up to him to run the checks out right here where the boxman could see them, and that would be with his right hand. And then he'd grab them with his left hand and hand them off. But he couldn't do it with his left hand because he'd turn his back to that side of the layout, and you can't do that. Same thing with this man. Now with him, he would be dealing it with his left hand. He couldn't do it with his right hand. It might be his better hand, because to do that, he'd have to turn his back to half of the layout of his, and which wasn't allowed. The other thing is the boxman had to be dealt to, not the players. So everything was cut out here so the boxman could see it easily, and then they handed it off. The same thing here. So what I'm trying to say is the hardest part about being a dealer, at least to me, was you had to be ambidextrous. You have to be just as good with your left hand as you were with your right hand, because you were dealing just as much with your left hand as you were with your right hand. And that's, for most people who are right-handed or left-handed, to get the other hand going, it took the most time and the hardest amount of work to catch up with. So I wanted to bring that to your attention, because in those days, because of the boxman, you dealt very much on this side of the layout in front of him, and then it got handed off. Or if you're going to make a payoff on a big place bet, you would make the total payoff, take what you were going to press the bet with, and give the change from there. But the boxman saw the payoff. And the other thing is, you said everything you were doing. You didn't just cut it out. You said making change, or I'm doing this, or 5 round, whatever. You always announced what it was, just like when you're on the stick, you called all the bets you were putting up on the proposition bets. So there would be no question about where it was going if there was a claim later. Just that was very important. The left hand, learning how to be just as good with the left hand as the right. Now I get into the Sahara a little bit. When I went to work at the Sahara, after having gotten that job, I talked about all that. One of the things that I noticed that I hadn't seen downtown was there were these big mirrors up above all of the tables, and I didn't know what they were. So of course I was curious, and I would ask. And they had them, there was a straight line all the way across on both sides of the casino, wherever the tables are, over the blackjack, roulette, and craps. There was no baccarat then. And I asked about that, and they said that's the eye in the sky, which meant they had guys up there who looked through, it was a two-way mirror, and they had telephones up there. But they used binoculars. There wasn't none of these scopes, cameras, and all of that stuff in those days. So they used binoculars, and if they saw something they wanted to bring your attention to, they would call the pit desk, and they would say, table so-and-so, this base, check out this guy, or stop this guy, or whatever. And then they would do whatever they were told to do. But it was people up there who did it, and most of these guys were dealers, people who had been dealers of some sort, either in Las Vegas or some other illegal place, and turned around and started cheating casinos. Instead of working for them, they were trying to beat them, or trying to cheat them. So they called them crossroaders. They crossed the road from dealing to cheating. So anybody who was a cheat, who tried to do something to the blackjack game or a crap game or a roulette game, was called a crossroader in those days. And there was a lot of them around. In fact, I remember one time they caught a crew, and they had a room up in Mount Charleston in one of the hotels, I think. And they had a crap table and a blackjack table and a slot machine. And they practiced all the ways to cheat it up there, and then they would come down here and attack the casinos with their whatever it was they were doing. So there was a lot of pros that spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to cheat the games, and some of them are pretty successful. One in particular that I remember was the 25-cent slot machines on the strip mainly were all getting busted. They have a hopper that has a lot of 25s, a lot of quarters in it, and the hoppers were getting emptied. And there wasn't a lot of drop, and all the hoppers were getting emptied. They couldn't understand what was going on. So this went on for quite a while, and then they caught these guys. What they were doing is they took the quarter, they glued a monofilament line around the edge of the quarter and kept it on a long line. They would drop it into the slot, let it fall in, pull the handle with one hand and hold the line with the other. The quarter would go through, the wheels would turn, and then they could pull the quarter back up again and just keep playing it like that. And they'd enter the machine with the same quarter. If somebody came, they'd just let the quarter go and go down. They had plenty of them in their pocket. All they lost was, they called it the yo-yo. And this went on for a long time, and they would when they caught these guys, they had a van, and the floor in the center of the van was, had like you could lift the top up, and it was full of quarters, thousands of dollars worth of quarters, and that was just that night that they would make the rounds. So you can imagine how much money they stole with this yo-yo thing. So now they had to go, the whole state, there was nobody else had legal gambling at that time, but the whole state had to redo their slot machine, so they had a cutter in it, so that whatever was going down, there was something that came across that would cut the cord. They had to go through that expense so that they couldn't do that cheating anymore. That was one of the ways they cheated. On the crap game, I caught some people at the Aladdin once. I'll get to that story when we get to the Aladdin function, which will probably be a couple of weeks from now. But this one quick story. They came in, they had an attaché case full of dice from every hotel on the strip, and they had loaded them with, they called them loads. It would be up, if you put a load on one part of the dice, the other part of the dice is going to be up all the time. So those were the numbers they bet on the crap game, because that was the one that was going to be showing. Then they had another type of dice, which it might have 1, 2, 3 on it, and then ordinarily it would be 4, 5, 6. But these dice would have 1, 2, 3, and then the other side would be 1, 2, 3, and they called them tops and bottoms because that's why you see stickmen, they have to flip the dice every 3 or 4 rolls. That's to make sure the boxman can take a look to see if it's a tops and bottom, because if you look at the dice, you can only see 3 sides, so you can't tell what's on the other side. You have to flip them so that you can see it. So in those days, I don't know about today, but every 2 or 3 rolls, you had to flip them so it could be seen that they weren't tops and bottoms. And there was one other type that was the toughest one, and they had all these in this attaché case from every hotel, and some of them had been used. You could see their edges were banged up. And so what they do with these is they put them in and then they take them out. They don't leave them in. They'll put them in for 2 or 3 rolls, and then they take them right out again. Now, he made me laugh one time when we signed off at night. He said, don't forget, whatever he said, and then he went like this with the dice. Now, in those days, if you saw a guy shoot like this, you had to take a second look, because that's how, when they were making a switch, they picked up your dice, tucked them in here, and held them with this thumb, and then threw their dice out like this. So anytime you couldn't see their hand, you had to take an extra look to make sure that they hadn't made a switch on you. Now, these guys that do the switching, there was always somebody else at the table who would throw in a bet or something, so the stick man would turn his head for an instant, and that's all it took. Just as the guy was reaching for the dice or pick up the dice to shoot him, this little thing would interfere with the stick man's eyes, and the switch would be made and the dice would be out. But this is what it looked like. The hand was never like this. Right. It was always like this. So when you saw that, and he did it, I said, this guy was a crossroader at one time.
Crossed over all right with my wife's outfit.
So anyway, that's something I wanted to talk about too. One of the other things that when we talk about being a crap dealer, one of the most important things to me, and I know a lot of the guys, we talked about it later, was being one of what they called a troubleshooter. If there was a game where it was too hard for a particular dealer to handle, he was struggling, they would come and get their best crap dealer and take him and say, let that guy off, take care of that game, he's having trouble. And when you were that guy, when they came to you, that was like heaven for a crap dealer. If they came to you and say, go deal the toughest game, you're the guy we trust to deal it. That was that was about as good a compliment as any dealer could get, whether it was at craps or blackjack or roulette wheel. Troubleshooter. That's pretty much all I got to say about that. We'll talk about the Sahara. Again, the eye in the sky was the first big thing that I had a question about. And the second thing was when I was a dealer and we'd go downstairs on a break, they had a dealer's room, a special room. The dealers weren't allowed to hang around with the customers, so as soon as you got a break, you went down into the dealer's room. They had a waitress down there, and they served you food and drinks free, their TV set. You could play cards, whatever. After work, we all played cards, sometimes for hours. But Elvis used to come down there and hang with us all the time, and that's where I met him. I got to be pretty close friends with him. I was 5 years at the Sahara, and he and Colonel Parker were friends with Milton Prell, who was the president. And so that's where they always came. They never stayed anywhere else. Whenever they came to town, they stayed at the Sahara because of Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker's friendship with Milton Prell. So I got to know Elvis pretty well. We became friends. I got to the point when he would check in, first thing he would do is come looking for me, and we'd get updated. We'd sit in the coffee shop sometime and just talk about what went on since the last time we were together. And we got to be pretty good friends. But the point I'm trying to make is he would rather be with us in the dealer's room than be upstairs with all the swells and all the big shots. He was only a few years older than I was. I think I was 22 at the time, and he was about 25. And he was still a young kid, too. And he was kind of shy, you know. He did what he did on stage, but he was kind of just a kid, just a regular guy, and he felt overwhelmed by all the big shots, all the swells, and so he would hang with us, the dealers, down in the dealer's room. So I got to be pretty close friends with him at that time. And I have a picture of Elvis with some of the bosses from the Sahara, and the tallest guy on that picture in the background, his name is Johnny Hughes. He's the casino manager that hired me, that I said was such a gentleman when I came to work there. So when that picture goes up with them and with Elvis, look for Johnny Hughes. He was a real gentleman, a very high-class guy that I've always had a great deal of respect for. He's the guy that put me to work at the Sahara, and he's in that picture along with Elvis and two of the other Sahara bosses. And of course, there's Louis Prima, and there's Don Rickles. I have a picture of the Sahara Casino, and if you look on the far left, you'll see the lounge, where the lounge was. There's like a white wall around that area, and above that white wall was all open. So right opposite that wall was the craps pit, and we'd be dealing at a table, and if there wasn't anything going on, a lot of times when Rickles or Prima were on, most of the people would be in there watching. And so we'd get to stand there and just watch the whole show because it was right there in front of us. And I must have watched Louis Prima and Don Rickles 300 times, because we got to watch the show free. And one of the things that happened, which was a big thrill for me, when I was a kid during the war, World War II, my sisters used to wake me up. They taught me how to do the Lindy Hop, a dance to Glenn Miller music. They had all 78 records of Glenn Miller and Harry James and all those, and they used to play these music, and they'd wake me up, and I'd have to dance in front of them for the girlfriend to show their girlfriends that I knew how to do the Lindy. I was only about 6 or 7 years old, and up comes the Glenn Miller band in the lounge of all places. I figured they would be in the showroom. But they put the Glenn Miller Band with Tex Beneke and the Modernaires and all the same people. The only one that wasn't there was Glenn Miller, of course, but all the other people, Bob Eberly, they were all up there on that stage right in front of me, playing the music that I danced to when I was a little kid during World War II, and I was just thrilled to see that in them in person. And I got to meet the Modernaires, and we'd had lunch together a couple of times. They were real nice people. And I told them the story about that, and they thought that was pretty cute, being a little kid doing a Lindy to the Glenn Miller music. But that was a thrill for me, and you see a picture. I brought a picture of them. It's from a postcard that the Sahara put out with the Modernaires on the postcard. That was one of the things about working on the strip, the celebrities. It was something like working at Republic Studios. There was always a celebrity. Milton Berle used to come to me and deal craps. He liked me. He picked me out to be his crap dealer. Lionel Palmer, the golfer, was another one. I was his favorite crap dealer, and he would always come to me. And one day he came in. This will be my last story. He came in and he brought this fat, chubby little kid. I didn't even think he was old enough to be in the casino. He brought him up to me. He said, "Ralph," he said, "This is a good friend of mine. I'd like you to teach him craps. Whenever he comes in, remember him and do me a favor, teach him how to play craps because he doesn't know anything about it." And I said, "Okay, sure, I'll be glad to." And I got to know him, and it was Jack Nicklaus. But at that time, he was just a little puppy, and he was a very set little kid, and he was just getting started. And it turned out to be Jack Nicklaus, one of the greatest ever. But at that time, he was just a kid learning how to shoot craps, in my opinion, anyway. So I'm gonna end my little skit here, and I'll turn it over to my friend Dan.
Well, we're going to take a break.
Before we go to
okay.
Danny,
Okay.
we got to pay some bills, all right? We'll be right back, all right? Don't go nowhere.
Ever wonder why some other guy gets all the chicks? Ever wonder why some other guy is always the life of the party? Ever wonder why some other guy is having all the fun? Ever wish you could be that other guy? Well, now you can be with the Dan DePaola trombone method.
Hi, I'm Dan DePaola, and I've been to countless parties and events, and I know what brings good times and chicks. The trombone. With my method, your calendar will never be empty again.
You'll learn to play the songs that will keep you and your friends knee-deep in good times and broads. Songs like Sir Duke, I Feel Good, Knock 3 Times, Hot Stuff, Celebration, Pick Up the Pieces, The Hustle, and of course, Tequila. For a single payment of only $49.99, you get a trombone, the method book, and an accompanying music CD. But wait, if you order in the next 15 minutes, you'll get this official Dan DePaola autographed photo absolutely free. The Dan DePaola trombone method. Create music, make friends, set the mood.
Okay, folks, welcome back. I'm so glad you stayed with us. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Dan here and to John. They've got some questions to ask of me and each other, so I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and Dan, go ahead.
Hey, everybody, it's Danny Craps. I don't know, but I'm mesmerized between Ralph Delegati and the law, Johnny Law, who lays down the law when he was a crap dealer. But some of the things Ralph said were very true. When you dealt this game, you dealt to the boxman. That's one of the first things you learned coming out of the gate. You dealt to the boxman. Forget the customers. You dealt to the boxman because they expected that from you. That's just how it was. The other thing is you better watch your end of the layout. Don't be hawking the dice. If the stick man isn't speaking up, the boxman used to take care of that. He would go like this, raise your voice, because hawking the dice was a big no-no. Because as soon as you took your eyes off your end, someone might be past posting on the don't, and that meant they would put a bet there that wasn't there before. And then you're wondering whether or not it was there or not. Because if you weren't sure, they had you. The other thing is when Ralph said about game protection. Well, there is no game protection in today's dice games. I know because I'm still dealing dice 49 years later. They don't turn the dice over. There's no boxmen. Dealers are lazy. They see a pretty girl walking by that's double-breasted. I don't mean with the suit. They take their eyes off. Things happen. You got to watch your end, and you got to watch the dice. Somebody could make a switch because now a floorman has to watch 2 games plus a roulette game, and they can't be there all the time. So game protection, there is none. Now I'm going to turn it back over to you guys.
All right, so I want to reiterate what Danny's talking about, game protection. So, and it's amazing because when I first got into business, one of the first things you learned as much as dealing was protecting the game. Protecting the game. The dealers got to watch. Actually, the way it was, the stick man was kind of in charge of one side, the box man was in charge of the other side. But it was big on protection. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to go on some stuff that Ralph talked about. Ralph, you're dynamite, man. I mean, really.
Thank you, John.
This is, and what's great about this show, this is all stories, just like Ralph's book. If you guys ain't got Ralph's book yet, Last Casino, get it. It's a dynamite book, and it's full of, everything's real, just like these stories. So, Ralph was around the early days. He was there before they were called buffets. They were called chuck wagon. But what Ralph said about Western, everything was Western. I think I was maybe 25 years ago. Guys still rode up and down Robindale, where my house was with horses. But everything was cowboys back then. In the business, one of the biggest cowboys, the guy that hired me at Sahara, Virgil Monk, Buddy Spock was a popular guy with the bolero ties and stuff like that. And El Dorado was a big thing. I mean, it was all about El Dorado. But I'm going to go back to the Horseshoe every once in a while. Even though it was El Dorado, everybody, you were allowed to wear a cowboy cut shirt,
Yes.
even on the strip.
Yes.
You were allowed to wear jeans.
Oh, yeah.
Horseshoe crab dealer, you wear dress pants and a white shirt. Right? That was the rule. All right. Ralph mentioned, talking about cowboys, Ralph Lamb. If anybody's been in town as long as we were, a Lamb, O.C. Lamb I know well. We had governors, sheriffs, there was Lambs all over the place, and they're still around. Going back to the history of it, but things like that are great. He talked about Louis Prima. When I bought my house over off of Warm Springs and Eastern area, Louis Prima's house was there, and he had a golf course there. I remember getting off Slingship one night, going home, and the house burned down that night. I think somebody did it, but Louis Prima's house was there when I lived over there, when I had my kids. Rolf talked about that chips were legal tender in town. One of the first times I heard that, we were at church, and the priest said, "Feel free to throw your chips in the basket," like nothing. Crap dealers at the Horseshoe, not so much gambling, but drinking. If you were a crap dealer at the Horseshoe and you didn't go get you got your first break, you're drinking Jack Daniels. If you didn't drink and you're a crap dealer, you might get fired for that. You gotta be one of the guys, man. But the rule at the Horseshoe is they don't care how high you are. If you can handle the game, nobody ever said nothing. Everybody knows Kenny Anderson, my dear beloved friend Kenny Anderson. He was dealing, had a couple Quaaludes in him, fell out on the table, The boxmen stand up. Kenny sat and boxed, passed out, all them chips on the table. Kenny knocked them all over the freaking layout. Teddy said, send them home. We'll see them tomorrow. So we used to do stuff like that. Ralph talked about being ambidextrous. All right. We really did used to get kicked. A boss would come and kick you hard. Use both hands, Lumpy. Use both hands, Lumpy. I mean, all the time you would see guys like that. Ralph mentioned before we had all the cameras, it was called the Eye in the Sky. I'll tell the story one day where Teddy caught a boxman and beat the crap out of him because the eye, like the mirror stopped in a certain area, and the kid over there was a boxman. He knew that the eye wouldn't see it, but Teddy crawled over there into a cup light, and he saw him. That's when Teddy come in the pit with a baseball bat. I'll tell you that story someday. But with regards to the Eye in the Sky, I remember when at the Flamingo they put an ear in the rug. Remember, they put a little microphone. A little microphone right where the bowl was on the dice man. So that was called the ear in the rug. It didn't go over well.
They got in trouble.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Ralph talked about putting load in dice. That's why you hear the term loaded dice, because that's where that come from, Ralph. That was pretty cool.
Can I interrupt you
Yeah.
one thing while you mention that? I talked about the loaded dice, and I talked about the tops and bottoms, and I meant to give the toughest one, and then I switched over to the way the crossroader here was shooting dice, and I forgot to mention the third one. I'll do that real quick. If you take a die, ordinarily a die is perfectly square. If you take it and you take edges off of it and make it a rectangular shape, not this severe, but just a little bit, it'll have a tendency to stay on this side. It won't do this. So they call that a percentage dice. There's just a little percentage that's changed that's in the favor of these sides of the dice, and those are the numbers you bet when you put those percentage dice in. They call them PCs, or percentage dice.
Right.
It's the toughest one to spot. The only way you can spot it is you have to put them together and turn them over and feel the
Physically
edges,
see it.
and one is a little higher than the other. But those were real tough when they're on the table. You couldn't see anything wrong with them. Loaded dice gallop.
Right.
The other dice, if you turn them over, you'll catch them. But this thing is very hard to find because it was very little change, but a big difference in how you bet, and that's how they
how
made
they
their
did
money.
it, right.
So they put them in for 5 or 6 rolls, and see, they never left them in. They put them in and take them out. Put them in and take them out. Anyway, that's the third one that I wanted to tell you about. Thanks.
Right, so talking about, so I worked in Sahara, a good friend of mine to this day, just heard him on Facebook. His uncle, Pete Berger, my buddy's Rick Berger, his uncle Pete.
Pete's a
Uncle
good friend
Pete
of mine.
was famous for, kick him over, Pete, kick him over, because that's how the bosses, if you were on the stick, there were times when they called it, spread them and flip them, right? You had to get the dice with the stick on top of everything you're doing. And usually when they do this, it's the busiest game. You had to take your stick, you had to turn them around, you had to flip them over every single roll. So that was kind of going back to these superstitious bosses. Ralph talked about troubleshooter. I'm going to tell you what, probably one of the biggest compliments I ever got in my whole career was when I was at the Horseshoe, and I was one of the guys that they would go take this guy out because he couldn't handle the game. It was a newer game, and the kid was a good dealer, but the games were so big, I'm telling you. They called it Manhattan because that's what it looked like. It looked like a view of Manhattan. But one of my biggest compliments was being one of these guys where Rick or Tommy would say, go take this guy out. So, and then going back to the dealer's room, back then we ate like kings at the Sahara. On graveyard, I had to work graveyard. I had real bad one of my car wrecks or something. I was on graveyard. We would go to House of Lords.
Really, really.
Right? You would go to the House of Lords. This is a high end. This is like the Bacchanal.
Not
House
when
of
I was
Lords
there.
is still one of the most famous things out there. But even the break rooms, even at the MGM, at Bally's, back then you would do a time order. So there would be one or two like busboys, waiters,
Yeah.
who would be in charge of just the dealers. And you would say, you would put in a time order. So I'm on break. I'm going to be back at 1 o'clock. When you come down there at 1 o'clock, you got a steak and lobster, and you can do that 5 times a night. Give them $20. These guys are making $200 and $300 a night just being a waiter down in the dealer's room. And then one last thing is Sahara, because I know that's one of the spots close to Ralph's heart. I love going into the Casbah Lounge. Waylon and Madam, we became friends with. So all these casinos kind of like had a secret door to get into the showroom. Back then, there's a bar right by the high-end pit in Caesars, and there was all these glass walls, and if you knew which one to push on, you go and you're right behind stage watching shows. So we used to do a lot of that. Anyways, I think that's about it for today. Listen, I want to remind you guys, our producer, John Stiles, what a dynamite guy. I'm an artist. This guy's creativity is out the door, man. I really, really dig John. So what I'm saying is, don't forget to check out our other shows here on WWDB TV, all right? You can find us on YouTube and Roku. And then, of course, you have our website, www.dbtv.com. Look at John has. John is dynamite. If you like the music, all right, and this is something I talked to him about and just said, feel free to mention it. John has these videos called Double Exposure, all right? So lately, in the past, whatever year or so, you'll see these videos where they play like a modern new song, kind of hip-hop, kind of boogieing, and they'll put it to these old Fred Astaire red button scenes like these. John has about 50 of them. So I'm going to tell you what, if you like listening to music around the house, whatever, you know what I do when I'm doing stuff? I turn the computer on, and I'll turn on John's station. The music is dynamite, but every once in a while, take a break and just watch the stuff that he puts together. He just doesn't have like Fred Astaire and stuff. He has amazing stuff. Double vision, all right? Double exposure. Check it out. That's for John, and we'll see you guys next week. Ralph, what a pleasure hearing all your stories.
yeah.
All right?
Thank you,
Really
John.
enjoyed it.
Yes,
Danny,
yes.
good seeing you.
Always
all right?
a pleasure.
All right, we love you.
buddy.
All right,
And-
we're all good.
And you
All
know,
right, the three amigos.
his double
See-
exposure has improved my yoga sessions.
Listen, I'm not going to make Danny wears underwear, right, Ralph?
Oh my God, he's gorgeous.
Danny has underwear on.
Dan
You want
is-
to show him? Oh, wait. That's
Tell him
stupid.
what's on the
We can't
underwear.
do that. Double X, triple X. Wear some
Triple X.
chicken pants next week,
Triple
right?
X.
They got ice creams on them. They don't melt right away.
Hey, listen, we'll see you next week, all right?
Can't wait,
We love
folks.
you, all right?
We love you.
All right, take
Bye.
care.
Craps forever.
Next
All
week.
right.